Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for inviting me here today. I feel a bit humbled having listened to some of these presentations. That often happens. Coming from the developed world, coming from rich developed world, it's sometimes really difficult for us to get our heads around the problems that some of the doctors have to manage. So I think that we mustn't forget, though, that actually there was a report recently by the International Labour Organization that looked at access to healthcare across the world. And in fact, interestingly, whether you're high-income, low-income, middle-income countries, there is still this divide between the urban and rural areas. So I'm not an expert. I'm here to listen in my role as the chair of the Wonka Working Party on Rural Practice. So really, I'm taking back what I hear from you. And I've just had 3 fantastic presentations. So I'm going to rush through what I'm doing because I want to hear from you, because that's important, really. I was asked by Raman Kumar to come here and to tell you about the Wonka Working Party on Rural Practice. So I might do a little bit of that. And he's also asked me to tell you about one of the innovations that we've got is producing a guidebook on rural medical education, and perhaps also try and get some of you here to fill in some of the gaps and write some chapters for that. So, Wonka. Wonka's been on everybody's lips. Wonka's the word of the conference. It is the World Organization of Family Doctors. Again, Garth, when he spoke, said that in fact it was formed in 1972. We now covers half a million doctors around the world, family doctors, and covers 90% of the world's population. It's divided into 7 regions. And the important thing here, there are a number of working parties who are looking at special areas. And with some of these working parties on education, environment, ethical issues, women, and family medicine, there are special interest groups looking at certain diseases. And obviously my interest is in rural practice. I think we can't say this often enough. This is where the future of family medicine lies. It's with young doctors. We really have to promote, we have to support. If you're one of these young doctors, it's great to see you here. If you're not one of these young doctors, it's our role to support them. I make it as blunt as that. And the young doctor group, as you all know, for South Asia, is the spice route. But going to Wonka Working Party on Rural Practice, it was formed in 1975 officially as part of Wonka. We then went for our first conference in China, in Fangxiang County near Shanghai, and this is a group photograph of us looking considerably younger than we are now. Our vision is about reaching out to rural health professionals, reaching out to people in rural communities, and some of the activities is about rural awareness, policy, education, research. We run regular conferences and health for all rural people. And I think if we are doctors and we are driven by the same values that we all have, we should be listening to what our 3 speakers have said before. It's about equity. It's about fairness. And if you live in a rural, isolated place, and if you're poor, you still deserve compassionate care, and you deserve quality care. And I can't say that more often. This is the Working Party board when we met in Thunder Bay in 2012. I have got some other photographs. It's the most recent I could find. But the history was there were 4 young doctors who met at the Wonka conference in Vancouver in 1992. John McLeod from Scotland, Roger Strasser from Australia, Jim Roke from Canada, and Nithya Naidu from South Africa. Some of you may know these extraordinary characters. And they said, there's all this academic stuff about practice, about general practice, but nothing about rural. And we know that 50% of the world's population is rural, but only 25% of the world's healthcare workforce work and live in rural areas. And if we're going to meet the goal of universal health coverage, this is the problem we've got. It's how are we going to provide care for people in Bihar? How are we going to provide care for people in Rajasthan? How are we going to provide care for patients there if we're going to get proper universal health coverage? That's the challenge. And that's the challenge that we need to keep on taking back to WHO, to World Bank. Okay, but we established properly in 1995. We had our first conference in 1996, and we run almost annual conferences. We don't run a conference when there is a World Wonka Conference. We've produced documents, declarations, publications, and I'll take you through a few of those. We have just published the first 2 decades of the history of the Working Party. I will try and promote this journal for you later on. It's the Journal of Rural and Remote Health. It's geared specially for rural. It's run out of Flinders University in South Australia. It's free to publish. It's free to read. It really is a fantastic resource. And the editors, and it's actually, there are now regional editors in Europe, North America, in Africa. I don't think there's anybody yet in South Asia, so this is a challenge to have a South Asia section of the Journal of Rural and Remote Health. It's entirely an electronic journal. It's free to use. It's very easy to use. And please, please think about publishing. And the nice thing about this is that if you're not feeling very confident, if you've got a concern about language, there are editors out there that will help you get it into a published form. We are not competing, as academics do often in the high echelons universities. We are there to help you get stuff published, and we are there to get your message over. Some of our policy documents, some of them are very well known. Probably the policy on training for rural practice, the middle one, has been quoted and cited in more journal papers than I know on training for rural practice, and it certainly was a seminal document. This is something that we were working on in the early 2000s. It's for health for all rural people. And the WHO is very interested in what we were doing, and I know that this formed part of the need for, in 2010, when the World Health Assembly came out with the declaration of the importance of primary care and the reaffirmation. The Melbourne Manifesto looks at the codes for recruitment of health professionals. I feel a little embarrassed that in my health system that I work in, we take young doctors from Eastern Europe, where they're desperately needed. In Romania, for every 10 doctors that are qualified every year, 11 doctors leave. How do you provide a service in that situation? And I know that, in fact, we've been taking doctors from South Asia for generations, and it's saved our health service, but it hasn't done a lot for taking away your highly trained doctors. We were involved with WHO, and again, I'd ask you to have a look at this. It's about increasing access to health workers in rural and remote areas through improved retention. It does look at recruitment as well, but this is evidence-based. WHO got itself into trouble because it was producing documents that weren't evidence-based, and this is one of the first WHO documents that actually was purely evidence-based, and it looks at all those issues that I spoke about earlier. Just to say, I'm going to rush through that. I joined in 1995. When I became the chair of the Wonka Working Party, I had a number of goals. The most important was bringing young doctors and students into rural Wonka. I still am passionate about that. Now, the good news, we now have a representative from the Spice Route, and my aim is to have a representative of every young doctor movement. I was also concerned, I looked around the table and I saw white, old men, and we needed to change that. So we needed social accountability, and we needed global accountability, and that's why I'm here, ladies and gentlemen, in India, because this is one of the biggest rural countries in the world, and we didn't have any proper representation. So I'm passionate that we need to do this. I needed to represent working doctors and get a balance between academics and rural GPs. You know, sometimes it's the academics that travel to conferences, that the rural jobbing doctors don't do that. So I've really felt important. I wanted gender equity, and we've almost got that, and I'm so proud that we've done that. So I've been hassled by my friends in the Woman and Family Working Party, and I've actually listened. So, and I wanted to work with other groups. Our last conference was this year in Dubrovnik, in April this year. But I'd just like to take you through some of the work that we're doing at the moment, which I think has got relevance to India. I'll come back to this, but this is the Rural Medical Education Guidebook. 70 chapters written by 72 authors from around the world, some of the world's experts on rural medical education. We've brought them all together, and I'll come back to that. That's my last slide. This is something that we were aware of. There's a lot of rural information out there. Some of it is not published in journals, it's grey literature. And we wanted to have a silo or a storage facility where people could send documents, papers they'd written, reports that had been produced, so they can be stored. And this is actually linked to the Wonka Working Party website, but it's actually hosted in Idaho in the United States. And it's thanks to a colleague of ours, Dave Schmidt, who's actually on the executive. We've all got heroes. If I ask you here, who's influenced you, you will always have a hero. Some of these people are unsung heroes. We don't know a lot about them, but they influence the way that we work. I've got my heroes, and I'm sure you have. And we decided to start collecting these people. These are people who really went against all the odds, people who worked unsung, that nobody knew about them in the rural areas. And this is our Rural Heroes page. And the top person there is a guy called Dewi Rees, who was a GP in Wales, where I come from. And it was his work that looking at accidents on tractors that actually made it compulsory to put cabs on tractors, because farmers were dying because tractors were rolling down hills. Particularly extraordinary work that Dewi did on bereavement. So we're looking at collecting those. We now have a student and young doctor group. It's run by a colleague of mine, Veronica Rasic, from Croatia, and that's the Facebook page. So if you're a young doc, if you're a student, look it up, join it. It's really worth joining. This is something that we haven't produced, but we've run with this. And again, my colleague, who's the surgeon, you know, we need to develop rural generalists. And the rural generalists will be context-based. So essentially, if a rural generalist in Greece might be different to a rural generalist in Canada or a rural generalist in India, it's about having the skills that you need in that context to provide that care. And I think that's what you were saying, wasn't it, really? And this is a movement, and again, I would suggest that you look at this. It's called the Cairns Consensus. The last conference on this was actually run just before our conference in Dubrovnik by the Rural Physicians of Canada. And I think that it is a movement that we need to look at and we need to support. So some of the current programs I've talked to you about, there's Student and Young Doctor Group. We're looking at developing a policy statement on physicians' assistants and nurse practitioners in rural practice. And I was delighted to meet one of the first nurse practitioners working in rural practice in India yesterday, which was great, and very pleased to meet her. We're also producing a document on rural proofing for health. Rural proofing is, you know, when people come up with policy and people come up with new laws, they don't actually look at the rural dimensions. They don't look at the impact on rural. And I'm sure we've all got examples of policy, of government policy that's actually been produced and it doesn't work. I run the Google group, so if there's any information I can send it out to you. It's also a discussion group and it gets lively at times. But I would really, if you're rural, if you want to be, please sign it. But if you're going to sign it, make sure I can read the email address so I can actually add it. I run a Twitter page called @RuralWonka. I also have my own Twitter page. There's a Facebook page that's run by Scott Jones in New Zealand. And we also have something called Google Hangouts, and I'll explain that in a second. We meet regularly on Skype, go to meetings, and other things. I've got to tell you about the student. This is an amazing, amazing lady called Mayara Floss. Mayara is a medical student in Brazil, and she said, you know, actually the education I'm getting is actually not really very relevant to what I'm going to be doing when I qualify. So she set up this thing called the Rural Cafe, and she runs these, and they're every 2-3 weeks, and she gets people around the world and they discuss issues. These are students and young doctors. So again, if you're a young doc, if you're a student, try and get, I'll take your email address and I'll send them to Mayara, because it would be really good for you to join that. So that's the journal, so please think about it. The next Wonka World Conference is in Rio de Janeiro, November next year. There will be a rural stream in it. I would be delighted if we could get some Indian papers in there. And if you join the Google group, I'll send you out some of the stuff that we're doing. So if you're interested and you want to contribute to some of those workshops, please do. And I know that it's much easier to get funding to go to these if you've actually got your name on a paper or a workshop. We're meeting the year after in Cairns in Queensland, Australia. In 2017, and the year after that, or the year after that in 2019, because there'll be a world conference, we'll be meeting in Kampala in Uganda. So perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, why don't we have an Indian World Rural Health Conference? Start thinking about it now. Get the ideas going so that we can take that forward. So, I'm not going to go, I was going to go to this, but we haven't got time. It's about having a workforce fit for purpose. And one of the ideas...
John, can you please...
Yeah, we were just going to say, I'm leaving those. We came up with the idea, WHO asked us, we had so many experts, they said, we need somewhere, some publication that actually people can access free of charge, that's actually about rural medical education. And this is the rural workshop, or the working, the rural medical education guidebook. It's got a long history to it. I won't go through all that now. And there's the contents. It's a huge slide. It's just to say that it's very, very comprehensive. 70 chapters, 72 authors. It's free of charge. That's the web page. It's easy to find. If you go to Wonka, which is Global Family Doctor, look for the rural group, and you'll find it on there. It's a work in progress. There's still some gaps. So, in fact, if you look at it and you think there's things that would be relevant to India are not in it, we're very happy to look at putting that in. Okay? I would love to have some Indian input. We're looking to publish it in paper format, but that's expensive, and we did this on very little money. So it was fantastic, really. So I'd just like to finish by saying thank you, and also paying tribute to a very great friend of mine, Dr. John McLeod, who was a doctor on the west coast of Scotland, and it was John's idea, and John was the co-founders of the Wonka Working Party on Rural Practice, and he was my mentor, and I thank John for a lot of what I've done. And I think we just need to have mentors in life. And if you are an older rural doctor, if you're an older doctor, find a young doctor that you can mentor and support, because that's what they're going to need to be able to stay in rural practice. So please, if you want, please fill your email address before you go. The other good news is that the Spice Route have now got a representative, and it's Pradesh Kumar, who's going to represent the working Spice Route on the Working Party. I don't think Pradesh is here. But also, we're going to set up a South Asia rural group, and Pradesh is going to be organizing it. So if you're interested in being on that rural group in South Asia, we need to get people from Sri Lanka, from Nepal, from Pakistan, from Burma as well. But if you're interested, please come and see me afterwards, but please sign up. It really is important. We're not experts, but we're going to change the world if we can work together. So it's the old story of we need to think globally to sort those local problems out. It's going to be a nightmare. You've got a hell of a hard job in India, but, you know, just to say that we're with you as well. So thank you very much.